Welcome back to Property Deconstructed. I'm Pat Panetta from Tell Your Story Media. We have Mark Errichiello here from Master Advocates Real Estate Services and Buyer's Agent. And what we do here during this program or these sessions is invite experts into our studio to discuss the world of property, Mark.
Yes, correct, Pat. Thanks. Great to see you again, and,
Yes.
and thanks for having us. So, the important thing is, experts and other industry associates that I've been fortunate to meet and collaborate with, having them on here, sharing a bit of collective wisdom for the listeners, as well as other industry professionals.
We've had lots of great guests over the series, and back in the studio, Leah Calnan. We're talking property management and investor-focused discussion. Leah is the founder and director of the Metro Property Management organisation, also property management training and consulting, and the past president of the REIV during the COVID-19 pandemic, which we covered in the last episode. But property management, you mentioned, Leah, that it's not as simple as it used to be. There's a lot of moving parts. So tell us a bit about that. I guess legislation, service, you and your team being a property manager, how is it different than it was? And what sort of advice can we give our listeners?
Yeah, so it's really different now, Pat. If I think back all those years ago when I started, it was very much around, collecting the rents, doing the maintenance, leasing the property. That was really the responsibilities of the property manager.
Yes.
But, what we've seen over time is, introduction of new legislation. When back in 2021, we saw 133 pieces of legislation changes that came into the property management space. So there was a large amount which incorporated, minimum standards and disclosures and safety checks and a whole lot of things. So it's really created a necessity for people to understand if you want somebody to be able to fix a problem, you need to be paying higher fees.
Right.
And I know most investors don't want to pay higher fees, and they try and crunch where they possibly can, but it's no longer just as simple as just collecting the rent.
So getting a property manager, you'll have to pay for the service.
Yeah, absolutely. And, now that there is the additional legislation requirements, there's a lot more strategy required when you're actually managing properties. It's not just, the rent comes in and the rent's dispersed to the owner. And we saw, as Mark was saying off air, we saw about 40% of the industry actually leave during the pandemic, and that was a combination of being burnt out, maybe an exit opportunity, and COVID was really, really difficult for the PM space.
Yeah.
But I think it does really give an indication now that, gone are the days of owners getting cheap fees or paying cheap fees because, that old saying, you get what you pay for, that's for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how do you cope with all that? A lot of people left the PM, the property management space, and as you say, various reasons. So now, how do you find with your staff? Is there anybody out there wanting to get involved in this area?
Look, there's
burnout
certainly a lot of ads continually happening, on the Seek and through the recruitment agencies. I think you've got to make sure that you're educating your team, making sure they understand. But there's also a level of angst, and as we see, we talk about crisis, whether rental crisis or affordability crisis, it adds pressure to the property manager every day. The poor property manager at times is, mentally beaten up by a renter who doesn't want to pay an increased rent. But then on the flip side is mentally beaten up by the owner who can't afford to replace the ducted heating, which may or may not have been an issue just because of the new safety checks. And we want to make sure that properties are safe. Absolutely, not alluding to not having safe properties, but property managers do continually have this need to balance their own emotions, but also to be able to respond to difficult situations and everything that's going on in society at the moment is quite stressful.
Yeah. And you're balancing the needs, and you want to look after both sides of the equation, the person renting the place and also the investor. So there's two sort of...
Well, you have a duty to both, but your investor as well. I think it was a great point that there was a lot of burnout and a lot of property managers leaving the industry. So I guess experience is what you're paying for now.
Absolutely.
And that's what counts, because I guess someone that's willing to dive to the bottom on fees based on a lack of experience to capture business, they may actually cost you more in the long run, not just dollar value on negotiating rents and management, but it would be a large liability risk if they're not abiding by legislation and safety matters and other things like VCAT as well. People don't even have funds for
you have to be skilled in VCAT, and now we've had the introduction of the interstate party legislation, which means that for an owner who resides out of Victoria, excluding a territory, that matter is actually heard in the magistrates court. So again, that's not a skill set that every property manager wants to have or needs to have, but you have to pay for that service in order to have your matter resolved.
Yeah, and VCAT, for the listeners that aren't aware or haven't invested in property before, it's the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal, so they hear the residential tenancy matters and other housing matters as well. But it is an area where if you haven't got experience, you get, I guess, a baptism by fire.
Yes, you do.
Which was, I was thrown into it without much training in my younger days. But but you do learn quickly.
Yeah, I've never been to VCAP, but a lot of people have, haven't they?
They have.
The experience there, you've been to a few in your day, I'm sure.
Yes, just a few.
Setting the rent, and with the interest rates going up, the rental sort of...
hopefully not.
No, that's right. Yeah,
it's tomorrow, isn't it?
At this point of recording, it is Monday the 5th of June, and they're meeting tomorrow, so we're not sure what's going to happen there. Oh, look, that's another emotional roller coaster for you. Yeah,
absolutely.
Having to sort of tenants, investors, having to change. There are good tenants, so what do you do? But of course, mortgage rates are going up. How do you sort of, pay the bank if you're not making the money back from the rent?
That's right. And there is a level of guilt that often owners will experience when they need to increase the rent, particularly if they've had a tenant in a property for a long time. And we want long-term tenants, but we also need to be mindful that often the rent becomes very out of sync between what they're actually paying and what market rate is, because there is a desire for time to time for investors to solely want a long-term tenant, but ultimately that can cost them in the long run, because when that tenant does vacate, you don't have that benefit of a change of tenant every few years where you can get in and repaint and recarpet or do little maintenance items. When you've had a long tenant for say 10, 15 years, when they ultimately vacate, you then have $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 worth of work that you need to do in order to bring it back to market rates. So, there's that mixed perception at times that having a longer term tenant is hugely beneficial from one aspect, but it can create cash flow challenges for the owner on the other side.
Something reasonable and meeting that is where the expert service comes in, monitoring the market, being there day to day. And I guess, people still, there are a lot of changes. It's not just a discussion for property managers anymore about what's happening in the rental market and sentiment. You do get calls straight after there's news of an interest rate rise or state budget and land tax decisions. So I think
coming off a fixed loan.
The fixed loan probably will be the discussion property managers receive first.
Yeah, that's that cliff coming they're talking about, that you're on a fixed rate.
That's right.
Is that right? And then now the bank's going to flick it back to variable.
So, looking at, when is the next rent increase due, and what is it? Is it at market? Can we increase it further in order to try and support the owner who is financially potentially struggling?
So I think the data around that is about 50% of the mortgages, and then there's about 1/3 of properties under a residential mortgage.
Right.
About 50% of them between February to October are coming off fixed term anniversaries on their loans. So they look at variable might be 5 or 6% on some of the investments. If they can hold, great, and if they can balance it with rental increases, great. But then they get the news of a possible land tax increase. Where's the incentive?
Oh boy, how do you carry that? If you can hold, you need a big bunch of cash behind you to sort of dip into.
Well, personally, I think until that happens, because there might be a collective uproar, and if there's more devastation in the supply, they might need to rethink those decisions with the land. I think there's a lot of inquiries going on now, because until it happens, let's cool our jets.
Exactly.
It may be something that we wait to respond to.
Yeah, that's right. Don't sell now just in case. We know that the government can change their mind, and they do.
Oh, possibly. That's good to know.
Yeah, like everything, they promised infrastructure updates and then that gets paused. So
exactly.
Everything can change.
There's recent discussions with regards to the school levies and those sort of things as well.
Yes. For those watching us on video, I think I've lost a screen behind me there.
Okay.
I think it was on a timer.
I like blue. It's a nice wave.
I think it's on a timer, and it's all right. Well, there you go. So there might be some changes. So we don't know. There's a few unknowns as we record today.
Yeah, that's right. And then, I was speaking to some of our investors that have been investing in property for many years, even before I was born. And there was apparently a time when if you took kids to a private school, you were actually
It was a tax deduction. I know, I've
in the
heard
past
that too.
because you were helping create space for public housing positions for kids, a new population coming in, new migrants.
Yeah.
They need spaces at schools as well.
Yeah.
So, different policies, different governments, things get fixed eventually.
Right,
Let's
right.
just not act
Okay.
in the
That's a
short
good point.
term.
That's right.
No,
Yeah.
knee-jerk reactions.
Yes,
Look
nice
long-term
point.
plans. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because I think they've got a bit stars in their eyes and thought, we want to get all this. This is the government. Get tax everybody and replenish our sort of bucket. But as you say,
Call it the
there's a
honey pot.
lot still to It's a lot still to play out there. I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. What about? I mentioned in the last episode. Were you giving an update to the REIV from your farm? Is that right?
Yes.
Live on sort of Zoom or video? Or?
Yeah. So during those 2 years at COVID, we were living on our farm, which we're very fortunate. And, over that time I had lots of, animals that I would adopt and they'd move in.
Yeah.
And quite often, every day I would do a video of some sort. And they'd be in different locations. And sometimes there'd be chickens that would run around, or you'd hear a horse neighing. But there was one particular one, there'd been an announcement on, I don't know, something around changing for agents to be able to get in and do inspections or something along those lines. And I was doing, my selfie updates, and I could see one of my donkeys wandering around in the corner of my eye, and then, didn't. Then she seemed to, I lost her, and then she bit me on the behind.
Right.
Yeah, and I did scream and all the rest, and everyone thought it was hilarious.
Yeah.
Through everyone.
Did they know what happened though? You just screamed out of nowhere.
Yeah. No, I did say. I was like,
I've just been bitten by a donkey.
The donkey just bit me on the bum. Yeah. So
Did you drop the F-bomb or anything?
No.
Jeez, that's good of you.
Yeah. You reckon the donkey? I think the donkey knew that she was live on the.
Yeah, I think she just
attention.
wanted to get back in the screenshot. She's like, "Mum, could you move to the left so I could have full frame?"
Yeah, that's right.
But the animals were well attended to the videos.
Yeah. I haven't seen it. So you got donkeys on your farm?
Yeah, I do have little miniature donkeys. Yes.
Oh, that's cute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with the big floppy ears and all that.
Yeah, this particular Millie, she has gigantic ears. Yes, gigantic ears. So,
when are we going to go to Leah's
Yeah,
farm?
it'll be
Mark?
fun.
I like that. Bring the
Animals
kids.
are fun. Yeah,
Yeah,
my
it
kids
is.
getting a bit
It's like
big
a
now.
zoo. Like a zoo.
What about your dog, Mark? That your big dog's like a
girl.
donkey. He's got a big Alsatian.
Yeah.
Got a big donkey,
She's getting to 40 kilos now. She's 3 years old, and she's a long fur, so she'll be. She scares a few people, but more just from her size. She's a big teddy bear.
Big
but
teddy bear, yeah.
I've seen people sort of coming
Across the
out-
road?
Yeah.
That'd be me.
looks
Or she
scary.
tries to take their food out. She took a packet of bacon off a guy coming out of the milk bar once, but it didn't. He held on to it, and she didn't break the seal. He was laughing, but thankfully it was
there you
a
Gone
good
home
end.
to have egg and bacon.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, nice. All right. Well, it's always a pleasure to have you in the studio and your guests. So let's thank Leah, and
Leah.
it's so good. Yeah.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for sharing.
Thanks for having me.
It's great.
Thanks for being here. Thank you, Leah.